But yes, I will continue. With chapter 30. September the 5th. The stay granted by the representative of Thomson and French, just when Monsieur Morel least expected it, seemed to the poor shipowner like one of those changes of fortune which tell a man that fate has at last tired of hounding him. The same day he told his daughter, his wife, and Emmanuel what had happened, and a modicum of hope, if not peace of mind, descended on the family. But unfortunately Morel did not only have to deal with Thomson and French, who appeared so well disposed towards him. As he himself said, in business one has associates, but no friends. When he thought seriously about it, he could not even understand the generosity of Messrs. Thomson and French. The only explanation he could find was that the firm had made the following self-interested calculation: "It is better to support a man who owes us nearly 300,000 francs and have the money at the end of the 3 months than to precipitate his ruin and have only 6 or 8% of the original sum." Unfortunately, whether through hatred or blindness, not all Monsieur Morel's associates thought in that way. Some even thought the opposite. The bills that Morel had signed were consequently presented at the till with scrupulous punctuality, but, thanks to the time that had been allowed them by the Englishman, were paid on the nail by Coquelet. The latter consequently went on in his state of fateful indifference. Only Monsieur Morel could appreciate, with horror, that if he had had to reimburse the 50,000 francs to de Beauville on the 15th, and on the 30th the 32,500 francs of bills for which, as for his debt to the inspector of prisons, he had obtained a stay, he would have been a lost man that very month. The conclusion in business circles in Marseille was that Morel would not be able to ride out the succession of disasters that were befalling him. There was consequently great astonishment at seeing him pay his debts at the end of the month with his habitual promptitude. However, this was not enough to restore confidence, and there was unanimous agreement that the end of the following month would see the unfortunate man bankrupt. The month passed in extraordinary efforts on Morel's part to muster all his resources. At one time his paper, whatever the term on it, had been accepted with confidence and even sought out. Morel tried to issue some bills for 90 days, but found the doors of the banks closed. Luckily, Morel himself had some bills due that he could call in. He did so successfully, and so found himself once more able to meet his obligations at the end of July. No one, as it happened, had seen the representative of Thomson and French again in Marseille. The day after his visit to Morel, or the day after that, he had vanished. As he had not been in contact with anyone in Marseille except the mayor, the inspector of prisons, and Monsieur Morel, his stay had left no trace behind it other than the different memories that these 3 people had of him. As for the sailors of the Pharaon, it appeared that they had found another ship to sign on, because they too had vanished. Captain Gaumard had recovered from the illness that had kept him in Parma and returned to Marseille. He was reluctant to go to see Monsieur Morel, but the shipowner heard of his arrival and went himself to find him. He already knew from Penelon's story how courageously the captain had behaved throughout the shipwreck, and it was he who tried to console the other man. He brought him his salary, which Captain Gaumard had not dared to draw. As he was coming down the stairs, Morel met Penelon coming up. It appeared that the helmsman had made good use of his money, because he was kitted out in entirely new clothes. He seemed quite embarrassed on meeting his owner. He drew back into the further corner of the landing, shifted his quid of tobacco from left to right and right to left, rolling his eyes and only replying with a feeble handshake to the one that Monsieur Morel, with his habitual warmth, had offered him. Morel attributed Penelon's embarrassment to the elegance of his dress. It was clear that the good man had not indulged in such luxury out of his last pay, so he must clearly have signed on with another ship, and his shame must be for not having, so to speak, gone into a longer period of mourning for the Pharaon. Perhaps he had even been to tell Captain Gaumard of his good fortune and let him know what his new master was offering. "Fine men, brave men," Morel said as he walked away. "I hope your new master feels as much affection for you as I did, and enjoys more luck than I do." August passed with continued and repeated attempts by Morel to increase his old credit or open a new account. On the 20th of August it was learned in Marseille that he had reserved a place on the stagecoach, and as a result they said that it must be at the end of that current month that he would declare his bankruptcy. He had already left, so that he would not have to be present in these awful circumstances, leaving his head clerk, Emmanuel, and his cashier, Coquelet, to take care of it on his behalf. But, against all expectations, when the 31st of August came, the office opened for payment as usual. Coquelet appeared behind the grille, as calm as Horace's just man, examined the paper that was presented to him with the same attention as ever, and, from first to last, settled the bills with his usual precision. There were even 2 reimbursements which had been foreseen by Monsieur Morel, which Coquelet paid as scrupulously as the bills which were personally drawn on the shipowner. No one could understand what was happening, but with the usual tenacity of prophets of doom, they postponed the bankruptcy until the end of September. Morel returned on the 1st of the month. His whole family had been waiting anxiously for him, because in this trip to Paris lay his last hope of salvation. Morel had thought of Danglars, now a millionaire but once indebted to him, because it was on Morel's recommendation that Danglars had entered the service of the Spanish banker in whose firm he had started to build his vast fortune. Today it was said that Danglars had 6 or 8 million of his own, and limitless credit. Without taking a single écu from his own pocket, Danglars could rescue Morel. He had only to guarantee a loan, and Morel was safe. Morel had thought of Danglars a long time ago, but one has certain instinctive and uncontrollable aversions, so Morel had waited as long as possible before turning to this last resort. He had been right to do so, because he returned broken by the humiliation of a refusal. Despite that, Morel had not voiced the slightest complaint on his return, or the least recrimination. He had wept as he embraced his wife and daughter, proffered a friendly hand to Emmanuel, shut himself up in his study on the 2nd floor, and asked for Coquelet. "This time," the 2 women said to Emmanuel, "we are done for." Then they put their heads together and quickly agreed that Julie should write to her brother, who was with the army at Nîmes, to tell him to come immediately. Instinctively the poor women felt that they would need all their strength to bear the coming troubles. In any case, Maximilien Morel, though barely 22, already had a considerable influence over his father. He was a firm, upright young man. When the time came for him to take up a career, his father had not tried to impose upon him, and asked young Maximilien how he felt. The lad replied that he wanted to follow a military career. He had consequently studied successfully, taken the competitive exam to enter the École Polytechnique, and graduated from there as a sub-lieutenant in the 53rd Regiment of the Line. He had been at this rank for the past year, but was promised a promotion to lieutenant at the first opportunity. In the regiment, Maximilien Morel was often cited as strictly observing not only all his obligations as a soldier, but also all his duties as a man, and he was nicknamed the Stoic. Naturally, many of those who called him by this name repeated it because they had heard it without knowing what it meant. This was the young man whose mother and sister were about to call him to their aid, to support them through what they guessed would be difficult times. They were not mistaken about the difficulty. A moment after Monsieur Morel went into his study with Coquelet, Julie saw the cashier come out, pale, trembling, his face expressing utter dismay. She wanted to question him as he went past, but the good man, plunging down the staircase at what was for him an unprecedented speed, only cried out, raising his arms to heaven, "Oh, mademoiselle, mademoiselle, what a terrible disaster! I would never have believed it." Shortly afterwards, Julie saw him return, carrying 2 or 3 thick registers, a pocketbook, and a bag of money. Morel examined the registers, opened the pocketbook, and counted the money. His entire fortune amounted to 6,000 or 8,000 francs, and his expected revenue up to the 5th to 4,000 or 5,000, making, at the very most, total assets of 14,000 francs, with which to pay outgoings of 287,500 francs. It was not possible even to consider an interim payment. However, when Monsieur Morel came down to dinner, he seemed quite calm. The 2 women were more terrified by this calm exterior than they would have been by the most abject depression. After dinner, Morel was accustomed to go out. He went to take coffee at the Cercle des Fosses, where he read La Semaphore. That day he stayed in and went back to his office. As for Coquelet, he appeared totally numb. For part of the day he remained in the courtyard, sitting on a stone, bareheaded under the blazing sun. Emmanuel tried to reassure the women, but he could not find the right words. He knew too much about the affairs of the firm not to realize that a great catastrophe was about to descend on the Morel family. Night came. The 2 women had stayed up, hoping that Morel would come and see them on his way back from his study, but they heard him tiptoe past their door, no doubt fearing that they would call out to him. They listened as he went into his room and locked the door from inside. Madame Morel sent her daughter to bed, and half an hour later got up, took off her shoes, and crept out into the corridor to look through the keyhole and see what her husband was doing. In the corridor she saw a shadow moving away. It was Julie, who, also worried, had been there before her. "He's writing," she said, going up to her mother. The 2 women had read each other's thoughts. Madame Morel bent over to the keyhole. Monsieur Morel was indeed writing, but Madame Morel saw something that her daughter had not noticed, which was that her husband was writing on headed paper. The awful idea came to her that he was making his will. She shuddered uncontrollably, yet had the strength to say nothing. The next day, Monsieur Morel appeared altogether calm. He went to his office as usual, and came down to lunch as usual, only today, after dining, he made his daughter sit next to him, took her head in his arms, and pressed it for a long time against his breast. In the evening, Julie told her mother that, however calm he might seem on the outside, she had noticed that her father's heart was beating furiously. The following 2 days went by in almost the same way. On the 4th of September, in the evening, Monsieur Morel once more asked his daughter to give him back the key of his study. She shivered. The request seemed ominous to her. Why should her father ask her to return this key, which she had always held, and which, even when she was a child, he had taken away from her only as a punishment? She looked at him. "What have I done wrong, father," she said, "for you to take back the study key?" "Nothing, child," the unhappy Morel replied, tears brimming in his eyes at this simple question. "It is only that I need it." Julie pretended to look for the key. I must have left it in my room," she said. She went out, but instead of going to her room, she went down to look for Emmanuel. "On no account give your father back that key," he told her, "and tomorrow morning, as far as is possible, do not leave him alone." She tried to question him, but Emmanuel either knew nothing more or else wished to say nothing. Throughout the night of the 4th to the 5th of September, Madame Morel stayed with her ear pressed against the panelling. Until 3 o'clock in the morning, she heard her husband pacing nervously around his room. It was only at 3 o'clock that he threw himself on his bed. The two women spent the night together. They had been waiting for Maximilien since the previous evening. At 8 o'clock, Monsieur Morel came into their room. He was calm, but the torments of the previous night could be read on his pale and haggard face. The women did not dare ask if he had slept well. Morel was kinder to his wife and more paternal towards his daughter than he had ever been. He could not have his fill of looking at the poor child and embracing her. She recalled Emmanuel's injunction and tried to follow her father when he went out, but he gently pushed her aside. "Stay with your mother," he said. She tried to protest. "I insist," said Morel. This was the first time that he had ever said "I insist" to his daughter, but he did so in a voice so full of paternal affection that Julie did not dare take a step forward. She remained standing where she was, motionless and speechless. A moment later the door opened again, and she felt two arms enfold her and a mouth pressed against her brow. She looked up and gave a cry of joy. "Maximilien! Brother!" she exclaimed. Hearing this, Madame Morel ran in and threw herself into her son's arms. "Mother," the young man said, looking from Madame Morel to her daughter, "what has happened? What is wrong? Your letter terrified me. I came straight away." "Julie," Madame Morel said, motioning to the young man, "go and tell your father that Maximilien has just arrived." The girl ran out, but at the top of the stairs found a man with a letter in his hand. "Are you Mademoiselle Julie Morel?" he asked in a strong Italian accent. "Yes, monsieur," she stammered. "But what do you want of me? I don't know you." "Read this letter," the man said, handing a note to her. She hesitated. "Your father's life depends on it," said the messenger. She tore the letter from his hands, opened it hastily, and read as follows. "Go immediately to the Allée de Melun, enter the house at number 15, ask the concierge for the key to the room on the 5th floor, go into this room, take the purse knitted in red silk that you will find on the corner of the mantelpiece, and take this purse to your father. It is essential that he should have it before 11 o'clock. You promised to obey me unquestioningly, and I am holding you to that promise. Sinbad the sailor." The girl cried out for joy and looked around for the man who had given her the letter to ask him some questions, but he had disappeared. So she looked back again at the paper and noticed that there was a postscript. She read, "It is important that you should carry out this mission yourself, and alone. If you are accompanied, or if anyone except you comes in your place, the concierge will reply that he knows nothing about it." This postscript dampened the girl's happiness. Perhaps there was some risk. Perhaps this was a trap. Because of her innocence, she was ignorant of exactly what might threaten a young girl of her age, but one does not need to identify a danger to fear it. Indeed, it is noticeable that it is precisely the danger that is unknown which one fears most. Julie hesitated and decided to ask for advice, but for some reason it was not either to her mother or to her brother that she turned, but to Emmanuel. She went down, told him what had happened on the day when the representative of Thompson and French had come to her father's, told him about the scene on the stairs, repeated the promise that she had made, and showed him the letter. "You must go, mademoiselle," said Emmanuel. "Go?" Julie murmured. "Yes, I shall accompany you." "But can't you see where it says I must be alone?" "And so you shall be. I shall wait for you on a corner of the Rue de Musée. If you are away long enough to give me any anxiety, I shall follow you, and I promise you this, it will be the worse for anyone against whom you may have any complaint." "You mean, Emmanuel," said the girl, still undecided, "that you think I should do as it says here?" "Yes. Didn't the messenger tell you that your father's life was at stake? But, Emmanuel, what risk is there to his life then? Emmanuel paused for a moment, but the wish to make up the girl's mind at once overcame his hesitation. Listen, he said. Today is the 5th of September, isn't it? Yes. And today, at 11 o'clock, your father has nearly 300,000 francs to pay. We know that. Well, Emmanuel said, he doesn't have even 15,000 in his cash box. So what will happen? What will happen is that today, if your father has not found someone to help him before 11 o'clock, by midday he will have to declare himself bankrupt. Come quickly, the girl cried, pulling him along with her. Meanwhile, Madame Morel had told everything to her son. He had known that there had been serious reforms in the economy of the household as a result of his father's misfortunes, but he did not realize that things had reached such a pass. He was completely overwhelmed. Then, suddenly, he rushed out of the apartment and ran up the stairs, thinking his father was in his study, but there was no answer to his knock. As he was at the door of the study, he heard that of the apartment open and turned around to see his father. Instead of going directly up to his study, Monsieur Morel had got into his room, for which he was only now emerging. He gave a cry of surprise on seeing Maximilien. He did not know that the young man had returned. He stayed motionless on the spot, clasping something hidden under his frock coat with his left arm. Maximilien quickly came down the stairs and embraced his father, but suddenly started back, leaving only his right hand resting on his father's chest. "Father," he said, deathly pale, "why have you a pair of pistols under your coat?" "This is what I feared," said Morel. Father, in heaven's name!" the young man exclaimed. "What are those weapons for?" "Maximilien," Morel replied, looking directly at his son, "you are a man, and a man of honour. Come with me, and I shall tell you." Morel walked with a firm step up to his study, while Maximilien followed him, his knees trembling. Morel opened the door and closed it behind his son. Then he crossed the antechamber, went into the office, placed his pistols on a corner of the table and pointed to the open register. Here was a precise summary of the situation. In half an hour, Morel would have to pay 287,500 francs. His total assets amounted to 15,257 francs. "Read it," he said. The young man read, and for a moment appeared to be crushed. Morel said nothing. What was there to say that would add anything to the inexorable verdict of the figures? "Father, have you done everything?" the young man said after a moment's pause, "to stave off this misfortune?" "Yes," said Morel. "You are expecting no funds to be paid in?" "None." "You have exhausted every possible resource?" "Every one." "And in half an hour," Maximilien said in a dull voice, "your name will be dishonoured." "Blood washes away dishonour," said Morel. "You are right, father. I take your meaning." Then, stretching his hand out towards the pistols, "There is one for you and one for me. Thank you." Morel clasped his hand. "Your mother, your sister, who will feed them?" The young man's body shook from head to toe. "Father," he said, "are you asking me to live?" "Yes, I tell you to. It is your duty. Your mind is calm and strong, Maximilien. You are no ordinary man. I am not ordering you, I am not instructing you, I am just saying, consider your situation as if you were an outsider looking at it, and judge for yourself." The young man thought for a moment, Then an expression of sublime resignation passed across his eyes. But, with a slow, sad gesture, he took off his epaulets, the marks of his rank. "Very well," he said, offering Morel his hand. "Die in peace, father. I shall live." Morel made as if to throw himself at his son's feet. Maximilien drew his father to him, and for a moment these two noble hearts beat, one against the other. "You know it is not my fault," said Morel. Maximilien smiled. "I do know, father, that you are the most honest man I have ever met." "Very well. There is nothing more to say. Now go back to your mother and your sister." "Father, give me your blessing." The young man knelt. Morel grasped his son's head between both hands, drew him to him, and, kissing him over and over, said, "Oh, yes, I bless you in my name, and in the name of 3 generations of men of impeccable reputation. Listen to what they are saying in my voice. The edifice which misfortune has destroyed, Providence can rebuild. When they see me dead in this manner, even the most inexorable will take pity on you. Perhaps you will be given the time that has been refused me. Try to ensure that the word infamy is not spoken. Go to work, young man, struggle eagerly and bravely. Live, you, your mother and your sister, on the basic minimum, so that day by day the wealth of those whose in debt I am should grow and bear fruit in your hands. Consider that a fine day is coming, a great day, the solemn day when the bankruptcy will be discharged, the day when in this same office you will say, 'My father died because he could not do what I am doing today, but he died with calm and peace of mind, because he knew as he died that I would do it.'" "Oh, father, father," cried the young man, "if only you could live." "If I live, everything will change. Concern will change to doubt, pity to implacability. If I live, I shall be no more than a man who failed to keep his word, who could not live up to his promises, in short, a bankrupt. But think, if I die, Maximilien, my body will be that of an unfortunate but honest man. If I live, my best friends will shun my house. If I die, all Marseille will follow me, weeping, to my final rest. If I live, you will be ashamed of my name. If I die, you can hold up your head and say, 'I am the son of a man who killed himself because for the first time he was obliged to break his word.'" The young man groaned, but he appeared resigned. This was the second time that certainty had descended, not on his heart, but on his mind. "And now," Morel said, "leave me and try to keep the women away from here." "Do you not wish to see my sister?" Maximilien asked. The young man saw a vague last hope in this meeting, which is why he suggested it. Monsieur Morel shook his head, saying, "I saw her and said farewell this morning." "Don't you have any particular requests for me, father?" Maximilien asked in a strained voice. "I do, my son. A sacred request." "Tell me, father." "The firm of Thomson and French is the only one which, out of humanity, perhaps out of self-interest, but it is not for me to read into the hearts of men, took pity on me. Its representative is the man who in 10 minutes will come here to cash a bill for 287,500 francs, and he, I won't say he granted me, but he offered me 3 months' grace. Let this firm be repaid first of all, my son. Let this man be sacred to you." "Yes, father," said Maximilien. "And now, once more, adieu," said Morel. "Go now, I need to be alone. You will find my will in the writing table in my bedroom." The young man stayed, not moving, feeling the wish to do so, but not the power to carry out the wish. "Listen, Maximilien," said his father. "Suppose I were a soldier like you, and I had received an order to capture a redoubt, and you knew that I would be killed in doing so. Wouldn't you say to me what you said a short while ago? Go on farther, because you will be dishonoured if you stay, and death is better than shame." "Yes," said the young man. "Yes, yes." And clasping his father in his arms with a convulsive movement, he said, "Farewell, father," and dashed out of the study. When his son had left, Morel remained for a moment standing, staring at the door. Then he reached out his hand, found the rope of a bell pull, and rang. A moment later Coquelet appeared. He was no longer the same man. These 3 days of certainty had broken him. This thought, the house of Morel could not meet its obligations, bent him closer to the ground than the weight of another 20 years on his back. "My dear Coquelet," said Morel in an indescribable tone of voice, "please remain in the antechamber. When the gentleman who was here 3 months ago, you know, the representative of Thomson and French, when he arrives you will announce him." Coquelet said nothing. He nodded, went into the antechamber, and waited. Morel fell back into his chair. His eyes turned to the clock. He had 7 minutes left, no more. The hand was turning at an incredible speed. He even thought he could see it move. It is impossible to say what was going on in these final moments in the mind of this man who, still young, perhaps as the result of misguided reasoning, however persuasive it might be, was about to separate himself from all that he loved in the world and leave this existence which offered him all the joys of family life. In order to gain some idea of it, one would need to see his forehead bathed in sweat, but resigned, his eyes wet with tears, yet raised heavenwards. The hand moved on. The pistols were loaded. He reached out, took one of them, and murmured his daughter's name. After that he put down the fatal weapon, took a pen and wrote a few words. He felt that he had still not said a sufficient farewell to his dear child. Then he turned back to the clock. The time could no longer be counted in minutes, but in seconds. He picked up the weapons again, his mouth half open and his eyes on the hands of the clock. Then he shuddered at the noise he himself made in cocking the gun. At that moment a colder sweat broke out on his brow, and a more terrible agony gripped his heart. He heard the door to the stairway creak on its hinges. The door of his study opened. The clock was about to strike 11. Morel did not turn around. He was waiting for Coquelet to say, "The representative of Thomson and French." He put the gun to his mouth. Suddenly he heard a cry. It was his daughter's voice. He turned around and saw Julie. The gun dropped from his hand. "Father!" the girl cried, breathless and almost fainting with joy. "Saved! You are saved!" And she flung herself into his arms, brandishing in one hand a red silk purse. "Saved, child? What do you mean?" "Yes, saved! Look, look!" Morel took the purse and shivered, because he vaguely recalled it as something that had once belonged to him. In one side was the bill for 287,500 francs. The bill was acquitted. In the other side was a diamond the size of a hazelnut, with these words written on a small piece of parchment: "Julie's dowry." Morel wiped his brow. He thought he was dreaming. At that moment the clock struck 11. It struck for him as if each blow of the hammer was striking on his very heart. "Come now, my child," he said. "Explain this. Where did you find this purse?" In a house in the Allée des Mélins at number 15, on the mantelpiece of a poor little room on the 5th floor. But this purse does not belong to you, he cried. Julie handed her father the letter she had received that morning. And you went to this house alone? He said after reading it. Emmanuel came with me, father. He agreed to wait for me on the corner of the Rue du Musée. But the strange thing is that when I came back, he was no longer there. Monsieur Morel, cried a voice on the stairs. Monsieur Morel! That's his voice, said Julie. At the same moment, Emmanuel came in, his face contorted with joy and emotion. The Pharaon! He shouted. The Pharaon! What is this? The Pharaon? Are you mad, Emmanuel? You know very well that she is lost. The Pharaon, monsieur! They have signalled the Pharaon. She is coming into port. Morel slumped backwards into his chair, drained of all strength, his mind refusing to accept this succession of incredible, unheard-of, fabulous events. Then his son came in, exclaiming, Father, why did you say the Pharaon was lost? The lookout has announced its arrival and it's sailing into port. My friends, said Morel, if this is so, we must believe in a divine miracle. It is impossible, impossible. But what was real, but no less incredible, was the purse that he held in his hands, the bill of exchange acquitted, and this splendid diamond. Oh, monsieur, said Coquelet, what does it mean, the Pharaon? Come, children, said Morel, getting up. Let us go and see, and God have pity on us if this is a false rumour. They went down. Madame Morel was waiting on the stairs. The poor woman had not dared to come up. In a moment they were on the Canebière. There was a large crowd in the port, and it parted to make way for Morel. Every voice was crying, The Pharaon! The Pharaon! And indeed, something wonderful, unimaginable. Off the Tour Saint-Jean, a ship with these words in white letters inscribed on its prow, Pharaon, Morel and son of Marseille, exactly like the other Pharaon, laden like the other with cochineal and indigo, was lowering its anchor and furling its sails. On deck, Captain Gaumard was giving orders, and Master Penelon was waving to Monsieur Morel. There could be no further doubt. The evidence of his senses was supported by 10,000 witnesses. As Morel and his son were embracing on the jetty, to the applause of the whole town which had come to see this extraordinary event, a man, his face half covered by a black beard, who had been hiding behind a sentry box and observing the scene with obvious emotion, muttered the following words. Be happy, noble heart. Be blessed for all the good you have done and will yet do. Let my gratitude remain hidden in the shadows like your good deeds. With a smile in which joy and happiness mingled, he left his hiding place, without anyone paying any attention to him, so preoccupied were they with the events of the day, and went down one of those small flights of steps that serve as a landing stage, crying 3 times, Jacopo! 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 At this a boat rowed over to him, took him aboard, and carried him out to a yacht, superbly fitted out, onto the deck of which he leapt with the agility of a sailor. From there he looked once again towards Morel, who, weeping with joy, was shaking the hands of everyone in the crowd, and vaguely thanking his unknown benefactor, who he seemed to be searching for in the sky. And now, said the stranger, farewell, goodness, humanity, gratitude. Farewell all those feelings that nourish and illuminate the heart. I have taken the place of Providence to reward the good. Now let the avenging God make way for me to punish the wrongdoer. At this he gave a sign, and, as if it had been waiting just for this to set sail, the yacht headed out to sea. And I think there might be a good place to take a break, because I'm just looking at the next chapter, and it's quite a long one. Such drama indeed. Good old Dantes. It's like, oh yeah, your ship didn't sink, it's fine. So happy about the ship. I know, yeah, I do like the way in which Dantes is going about being good to his friends. Also, yes, sorry, I didn't put like a content warning for like suicide or near suicide, but didn't realise that was going to happen, so apologies for that. But it's all fine. Everything worked out. No one killed themselves. It's all fine. And also, hello Speedy. Did I see you resubbed? Madness, I say. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. But yes, I think we shall take a break there. So I think everybody go do what you do in breaks. Yes, see you back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. Hello, and we're back. And I now have a cup of tea. And a glass of water that I'm just trying to make sure that I don't spill everywhere. Whoops, too soon. Sorry, Sam. But yes, I hope don't do a Sam. No, that's henceforth how it's going to be known. Yes, I hope everybody has had a good break. Oh, hi, Boo. Hope you are well. Welcome in. Yeah, hope everybody's had a nice break, has done what you do in a break. And Speedy asking... Oh, I see you're asking about, like, what you can read on Twitch and stuff. Yeah, I mean, what Sam said, in general, it's a question of you definitely haven't come out of lurking for a bad joke. No, you would never do that, Buddha, would you? Never. You never make bad jokes. You only make terrible ones. Yeah, so I think... yeah, as Sam says, you probably would get away with... Yeah, I know, Buddha, I'm in a fighty mood. That's a lot coming from me, I know. But it means I can say it. So, yes, in general, the problem when, like, you're reading or putting out in sort of digital format a recording of something that is being monetized somehow, for example via Twitch, if you are making money from something, for example via subs, that is when you need to check about copyright and things like that. If you're just putting stuff out there that you're not monetizing in any way, I think that's fine. Again, don't quote me on this, I may be wrong. I'm just, this is from my knowledge from like music copyright and stuff. But yeah, so I mean, I imagine if you're not, like, you could probably, like, just, like, read something and, like, yeah, if you get subs that stream or something, I don't know, but I would check, definitely. But I would imagine there are people on Twitch reading all sorts of stuff. I would expect that is in copyright. Yeah, you just, if you're not monetizing it, you're not laying claim to the work in any way, shape or form, because you're not kind of putting it out there and getting money from it. So yeah, we're trying to be very thorough, and just make sure that we don't step over any lines, and also, quite frankly, there's quite a lot of classic fiction out there, and yeah, and for a lot of people, there's a lot of kind of, especially for me, is like lots of classic fiction. For example, the Count of Monte Cristo, that I've been meaning to read for years, but I've just never got round to it. So it's a nice thing to have a lot of this kind of classic fiction that everybody goes, oh yeah, that book, I should read that. But having it in this kind of chill format where people can just watch live or watch the VODs and stuff like that, and they don't have to sit down with a massive book and remember what happened last time. I think that's quite nice with a lot of classic fiction. And yeah, yes, good, yeah. While Twitch has content ID systems for tracking music copyright, probably safer reading books. Yes, I imagine it's a lot harder for any kind of, like, yeah, tracking system to track actual words, because there's a lot of words, there are a lot of books, and there's going to be combinations of words that come up several thousand times in every single book. So yeah, so I imagine you probably would be fine reading something new, or newer at least. Yeah, also I imagine if it's something like, I don't know, is it like Merlin sort of books from the series? I didn't even know they did that. It's kind of cool. Yeah, if it's that kind of thing, it's not like if it's something from sort of a popular media thing rather than a book that someone is actually like trying to earn a living from, I would imagine that's even safer. Again, I don't know, because BBC might have spies everywhere, who knows. But yeah, I imagine you would probably be okay. But also, I guess it's always worth checking. Basically everything Sam said, but in a more long-winded, rambly way. Excuse the slurping. I have tea. And I don't know how to drink tea without slurping. Apparently you're actually meant to slurp tea when you're tasting tea. Apparently it is the way to taste tea. Random tea facts with Lucy. Right. So, where are we at? Let me have a look at this chapter, see how long it is. It's quite a lot of pages. Excuse the page turning noise. How long is that one? Yeah, a bit longer. Yeah, ask away. We are, yeah, we're not, as Sam said, we're not experts, but yeah, very willing to help. Yes. And also, I saw you say you liked the break music, BD. Thank you. I'm going to add more to the playlist, I think, for the break music, and maybe for like the intro music as well. Keep on meaning to, but because apparently lots of versions of that particular Chopin piece that's in the break keep getting muted, even though it's very much obviously not anyone's performance, because it's very obviously sort of chiptune. Not really chiptune, but you know. I should stop rambling. Let's carry on with the Count of Monte Cristo, shall we? With chapter 31. Italy, Sinbad the Sailor. Near the beginning of the year 1838, two young men belonging to fashionable Parisian society, Viscount Albert de Morcerf and Baron Franz de Pinay, found themselves in Florence. They had agreed that they would meet to spend that year's carnival together in Rome, where Franz, who had lived in Italy for nearly 4 years, would serve as Albert's guide. Since visiting Rome for the carnival is no small matter, especially when one does not intend to spend the night in the Piazza del Popolo or the Campo Vacchio, they wrote to Signor Pastrini, proprietor of the Hôtel de Londres in the Piazza di Spagna, to request him to reserve a comfortable suite for them. Pastrini replied that he could only offer them 2 rooms and a drawing-room al secondo piano, for which he would accept the modest emolument of a louis a day. The 2 young men accepted, and then, wishing to make use of the intervening period, Albert left for Naples, whilst France remained in Florence. When he had spent some time enjoying life in the city of the Medici, when he had walked back and forth in that Eden which is known as the Casini, when he had been a guest in the houses of those splendid hosts who do the honours of Florence, he took a fancy, having already seen Corsica, the cradle of Bonaparte, to visit the island of Elba, that great staging post in the life of Napoleon. So one evening he untied a barchetta from the iron ring that was attaching it to the docks at Leghorn, settled himself in the stern, wrapped in his cloak, and spoke only these words to the sailors: "To Elba!" The boat left the harbour like a seabird leaving its nest, and the next day put France down in Portoferrajo. He crossed the imperial island, following every trace that the giant's footsteps had left there, and embarked at Marciana. 2 hours after leaving land, he touched it again, getting off at Pianosa, where he had been assured that he would find infinite numbers of red partridge. The hunting proved poor. Franz killed barely a handful of thin birds, and, like any huntsman who has tired himself out to no purpose, got back into his boat in rather bad humour. "Now, if your Excellency wishes," said the boatman, "you could have some good hunting." "Where?" "Do you see that island?" the boatman said, pointing southwards and indicating a conical mass which rose out of the sea, bathed in the loveliest indigo light. "What is it?" Franz asked him. Monte Cristo, said the Livornon. But I have no license to hunt on that island. Your Excellency does not need permission. The island is deserted. Well, I never, said the young man. That's rare. A desert island in the middle of the Mediterranean. But natural, Excellency. The island is a mass of rock. There is perhaps not so much as an acre of cultivable land on its surface. And to whom does it belong? To Tuscany. What game will I find there? Thousands of wild goats, which live by licking the rocks, I suppose, Franz said with an incredulous smile. No, by grazing on the heather, the myrtles and the gum trees that grow between them. Where could I sleep? On the ground, in caves, or on board in your cloak. In any case, if your Excellency wishes, we can leave immediately. The hunt is over. As your Excellency knows, we can sail as well by night as by day, and if the wind fails, we can row. As Franz still had some time before he needed to meet his friend, and as he was assured of their lodgings in Rome, he accepted this proposal to compensate for the disappointment of his previous hunt. On his ascent, the sailors exchanged a few words in a whisper. "Well," he asked, "what now? Is there some problem?" "No," said the master of the boat, "but we must advise your Excellency that the island has been designated contumacious." "What does that mean?" "It means that, since Monte Cristo is uninhabited, and is sometimes used as a staging post by smugglers and pirates from Corsica, Sardinia, or Africa, if there is any evidence of our having stopped there, we shall be obliged when we return to Leghorn to spend 6 days in quarantine." The devil we will! That puts a different complexion on it. 6 days? Same time that it took God to create the world. It's a bit too long, my friends. But who is it to say that His Excellency has been to Monte Cristo? "I certainly shan't," Franz exclaimed. "And nor will we," said the sailors. "In that case, ahoy for Monte Cristo!" The master ordered them to change course for the island, and the boat began to sail in that direction. Franz waited for the manoeuvre to be completed, and when the new course was set, the wind was filling the sail, and the 4 sailors had resumed their places, 3 at the bow, 1 at the rudder, he resumed his conversation with the captain. "My dear Gaetano," he said, "I think you just said that the island of Monte Cristo was a refuge for pirates. This is a rather different game from goats." "Yes, Excellency, that's a fact." "I knew that there were such people as smugglers, but I thought that since the capture of Algiers and the destruction of the Regency there were no pirates left outside the novels of Fenimore Cooper and Captain Marryat." "Your Excellency is wrong. The same is true of pirates as of bandits, who were supposed to have been exterminated by Pope Leo XII, but who nonetheless stop travellers every day right up to the gates of Rome. Did you not hear that barely 6 months ago the French charge d'affaires to the Holy See was robbed 500 yards from Velletri?" "Yes, I did." "Now, if your Excellency were to live in Leghorn, as we do, you would hear from time to time that a vessel laden with merchandise, or a pretty English yacht which was expected in Bastia, Portoferrajo, or Civitavecchia, has not made port, and that no one knows what has become of it, except that it has doubtless been wrecked on some rock. Well, the rock that it hit was a long narrow boat, with 6 or 8 men on board, which surprised it and pillaged it, by some dark and stormy night off a wild uninhabited island, just as bandits stop and pillage a mail coach at the entrance to a wood." "But in that case," said Franz, still lying back in the boat, "why don't the victims of these accidents complain and bring down the vengeance of the French, Tuscan, or Sardinian governments on the head of the pirates?" "Why not?" Gaetano asked with a smile. "Yes, why not?" "Because first of all they unload everything that is worth taking off the ship or the yacht and put it in their boat. Then they tie the hands and feet of the crew, tie a cannonball round the neck of each man, make a hole as big as a barrel in the keel of the captured vessel, go back up on deck, batten down the hatches, and return to their own boat. 10 minutes later, the ship starts to moan and groan, then bit by bit it founders. First one side, then the other goes under, then it rises up, and dips down again, slipping lower and lower each time. Suddenly there is a noise like a cannon shot. That's the air bursting the deck. Then the vessel struggles like a drowning man, getting heavier with every movement that it makes. Soon the water, trapped under pressure inside, bursts out of every opening like the spouting liquid from the air holes of a gigantic whale. Finally it gives its death cry, rolls over on itself and goes under, leaving a huge funnel in the deep which spins for an instant, then gradually fills and eventually disappears altogether. The result is that in 5 minutes only the eye of God himself could see a trace of the vanished ship beneath the calm surface of the sea. "Now do you understand," he added, smiling again, "why the ship does not return to port and the crew does not lodge a complaint?" If Gaetano had told him this story before suggesting their expedition, Franz would quite probably have thought twice before agreeing to it. But they were on their way, and he felt it would be cowardly to go back. He was one of those who do not court danger, but who, if it presents itself, retain all their composure in confronting it. He was one of those calm-willed men who consider a risk in life as they do an opponent in a duel, measuring his movements, studying his strength, and breaking off long enough to catch their breath, but not enough to appear cowardly. Such men, assessing all their advantages with a single glance, kill with a single blow. "Ha!" he continued. "I have crossed Sicily and Calabria. I've sailed round the archipelago for 2 months, and yet never have I seen any trace of bandit or pirate. But I did not say that, Your Excellency, in order to suggest that you should alter your plans. Your Excellency asked me a question, and I replied, nothing more." "Yes, my dear Gaetano, and your conversation is most interesting. So, as I want to enjoy it as long as possible, let's go to Monte Cristo." However, they were quickly nearing the end of the journey. They had a fresh wind in their sails, and the boat was making 6 or 7 knots. At their approach, the island seemed to rise up out of the sea. Through the clear atmosphere of the dying rays of the sun, they could see, like cannonballs in an arsenal, the mass of rocks piled up, one above the other, with between them the dark red of the heather and the light green of the trees. Though the sailors appeared perfectly calm, it was clear that they were watchful, scanning the vast mirror across which the boat was slipping, its horizon interrupted only by the white sails of a few fishing boats which hovered like seagulls on the crests of the waves. They were scarcely more than 15 miles from Monte Cristo when the sun began to set behind Corsica, the mountains of which rose up to their right, darkly serrated against the sky. The mass of stones rose threateningly in front of the boat, like the giant Adamastor, its crest gilded by the sun which was concealed behind it. Little by little the shadowy figure came up out of the sea and appeared to drive before it the last ray of the dying day, until at last the shaft of light was driven to the very tip of the cone, where it paused for a moment like the flaming plume of a volcano. Finally the darkness, still rising, progressively swept across the summit as it had previously swept across the base, and the island had only the appearance of a mountain, growing constantly a darker shade of grey. Half an hour later, everything was pitch black. Luckily the sailors were in familiar waters and knew every last rock in the Tuscan archipelago. Otherwise, in the midst of this blackness that had enfolded the boat, Franz might not have been altogether easy in his mind. Corsica had vanished entirely, and even the island of Monte Cristo had become invisible, but the sailors seemed to have the lynx's faculty of seeing in the dark, and the pilot, sitting at the rudder, did not show the slightest hesitation. About an hour had passed since sunset when Franz thought he could see a dark shape, about 1/4 of a mile to the left. It was so difficult to distinguish what it could be that, rather than risking the sailors' mockery by mistaking some passing clouds for land, he said nothing. But suddenly a great light appeared on the shore. The land might resemble a cloud, but this fire was not a meteor. "What's that light?" he asked. "Hush!" said the boatman. "It's a fire." "But I thought you said that the island was uninhabited." "I said that it had no permanent inhabitants, but I also mentioned that smugglers sometimes put in here." "And pirates?" "And pirates," said Gaetano, repeating Franz's words. "That's why I gave the order to sail past the island. As you can see, the fire is behind us." "But surely," Franz said, "it seems to me that this fire should reassure us rather than otherwise. People who were afraid of being seen would not have lit a fire like that." "Oh, that means nothing," said Gaetano. "If you could judge the position of the island in the darkness, you would see that the fire is sited in such a way that it cannot be seen from the coast, or from Pianosa, but only from the open sea." "So you suspect that this fire indicates unwelcome company?" "That's what we must find out," said Gaetano, keeping his eyes fixed on the terrestrial star. "How can we do that?" "You'll see." At this, Gaetano had a few words with his comrades, and after they had talked for 5 minutes, they carried out a manoeuvre which allowed them instantly to reverse their course. In this way they were sailing back in the direction from which they had come, and a few moments later the fire disappeared, hidden behind some outcrop on the land. At this, the pilot altered course yet again with the rudder, and the little boat came visibly closer to the island until it was only some 50 yards offshore. Gaetano lowered the sail, and the boat remained stationary. All this had taken place in the most profound silence. Indeed, since the change of course, not a word had been spoken on board. Gaetano, having suggested the expedition, had taken full responsibility for it on himself. The 4 sailors kept peering at him, preparing the oars and evidently getting ready to row to shore, which, thanks to the darkness, was not difficult. As for Franz, he was inspecting his weapons with the characteristic sang-froid we have mentioned. He had 2 double-barrelled guns and a rifle, which he loaded. Then he cocked them and waited. Meanwhile, the master had taken off his shirt and jacket and secured his trousers around his waist. As he was barefoot, he had no shoes or stockings to remove. Once dressed, or rather undressed like this, he put his finger to his lips to show that they should observe complete silence, and, after slipping gently into the sea, swam towards the shore, but so cautiously that they could not hear the slightest sound. His path could be followed only by the phosphorescent trail he left in his wake. Soon even this disappeared, and it was clear that Gaetano had reached land. For half an hour everyone on the boat remained motionless. Then the same luminous furrow reappeared near the shore and came towards them. In a moment, with two strokes, Gaetano was alongside. "Well?" Franz and the 4 sailors asked simultaneously. "Well," said Gaetano, "they are Spanish smugglers, and they only have with them 2 Corsican bandits." "What are 2 Corsican bandits doing with Spanish smugglers?" "Bless my soul," said Gaetano, in tones of the most sincere Christian charity. "We're here to help one another, Excellency. Bandits are often hard-pressed on land by the gendarmes or the cabarini, so they find a boat with good fellows like us in it. They come and request the hospitality of our floating house. How can one refuse to succour a poor devil with men on his tail? We take him in and, for greater safety, put out to sea. This costs us nothing, and it saves the life, or at least the freedom, of one of our fellow men, who, as it happens, acknowledges the service we have done him by showing us a good spot to put off our cargo where it is safe from prying eyes." "Oh, I see," said Franz. "And are you a bit of a smuggler yourself, then, my dear Gaetano?" "What do you expect, Excellency?" he replied with an indescribable smile. "One does a bit of everything. A man must live. So you know where you stand with the present inhabitants of Monte Cristo? More or less. We sailors are like Freemasons. We recognise one another by certain signs. And you think we shall have nothing to fear if we disembark here in our turn? Nothing at all. Smugglers are not thieves. But what about the 2 Corsican bandits? Franz insisted, trying to allow for every possibility. Good Lord, said Gaetano. It's not their fault if they're bandits, it's the fault of the authorities. How can that be? Of course they are being hunted down because they made their bones, nothing more. As if revenge wasn't in a Corsican's nature. What do you mean by making their bones? Having killed someone? Franz asked, still curious. I mean killing an enemy, said the master. That's quite different. Well then, the young man said, let's go and ask for the hospitality of these smugglers and bandits. Will they welcome us? No doubt at all. How many of them are there? 4, Excellency. With the 2 bandits, that makes 6. Just the same as us, in fact. And if these gentlemen should prove unfriendly, then we are in a position to keep them at bay. So, one last time, let's land on Monte Cristo. Yes, Excellency, but will you allow me to take a few extra precautions? What? My good fellow, be as wise as Nestor and as cautious as Ulysses. I not only allow it, I beg you. Silence, said Gaetano, and they all fell silent. For someone like Franz, who considered everything in its true light, the situation, while not dangerous, still gave pause for serious thought. He was here, in the most profound darkness, in the middle of the sea, with sailors who did not know him, and who had no reason to be loyal to him, who, moreover, knew that he had a few thousand francs in his belt, and who had 10 times examined his guns, at least with curiosity, if not envy. They were fine pieces. In addition to that, escorted by only these men, he was about to land on an island which certainly had a very religious name, but which appeared to offer Franz no greater hospitality than Calvary did to Christ, in view of the smugglers and the bandits. Then those stories of scuttled ships, which he had thought exaggerated by daylight, seemed more believable in the dark. So, caught between this, perhaps imaginary, double danger, he did not take his eyes off the men or his hand off the rifle. During this time, the sailors had once more raised their sails and resumed their previous course. Through the darkness, Franz, whose eyes were already becoming somewhat accustomed to it, could see the granite giant beside which the boat was sailing. Then, finally, as they came round a rock for the second time, he saw the fire burning more brightly than ever, and around it 5 or 6 seated figures. The light extended some 100 yards across the sea. Gaetano sailed just outside its reach, keeping the boat in the unlit darkness beyond. Then, when he was directly across from the bonfire, he turned the bow towards it and sailed boldly into the circle of light, singing a fisherman's song and taking the main part himself, while the crew joined in with the chorus. At the first words of the song, the men sitting round the fire got up and walked across to the landing stage, keeping a close watch on the approaching boat so as to assess its size and intentions. They soon appeared to have satisfied themselves and went back to their places around the fire, where a kid was roasting, apart from one who remained standing on the shore. When the boat was about 20 yards from land, the man on the shore mechanically gestured with his carbine, like a sentry greeting a returning patrol, and shouted, "Who goes there?" in Sardinian patois. Franz cocked his repeating rifle unemotionally. At this, Gaetano exchanged a few words with the man, which Franz could not understand, though they clearly concerned him. "Does your Excellency wish to be named?" the master asked, or would he prefer to go incognito? My name must be entirely unknown to these men, Franz said, so just tell them that I am a Frenchman who is travelling for his own amusement. When Gaetano had communicated this to him, the sentry gave an order to one of the men sitting at the fire. He immediately got up and disappeared among the rocks. There was a silence. Everyone appeared preoccupied with his own affairs, Franz with the landing, the sailors with their sails, the smugglers with their kid. But in the midst of this apparent lack of curiosity, they were observing one another. The man who had gone away suddenly came back, from the opposite direction to the one in which he had gone. He nodded to the sentry, who turned to them and said merely, "S'accomodi." This Italian's "s'accomodi" is untranslatable. It means at once, come in, welcome, make yourself at home, you are the master. It's like the Turkish phrase in Molière's play, which astonished the bourgeois gentilhomme by all the meanings that it could contain. The sailors did not wait to be asked twice. With 4 strokes of the oars they brought the boat to shore. Gaetano jumped onto the beach, whispered a few more words to the sentry, and his crew then came down one after the other. Finally, it was Franz's turn. He had one of his guns slung across his shoulder, Gaetano had the other, and one of the sailors was holding the rifle. His dress had something of both the artist and the dandy, which aroused no suspicion in his hosts, and consequently no unease. The boat was tied up on the shore, and they started to walk around, looking for a suitable place to camp. But the direction in which they were walking was not to the liking of the smuggler who was acting as sentry, because he shouted to Gaetano, "No, not over there, please." Gaetano mumbled some excuse and, without argument, went over to the other side, while 2 sailors went to fetch lighted torches so that they could see their way. They went for about 30 yards, then stopped on a little esplanade, entirely surrounded by rocks, in each of which a kind of seat had been hollowed, not unlike small sentry boxes where the guard can sit down. Around them, in patches of soil, grew some dwarf oaks and thick clumps of myrtle. Franz lowered a torch and recognized from a pile of ashes that he was not the first person to notice the comfort of this spot, which must be one of the usual stopping places of random visitors to Monte Cristo. He stopped worrying about any incident that might occur. Once on dry land, and having seen the mood of his hosts, which, if not friendly, was at least one of indifference, all his anxieties had vanished. With the smell of roast kid coming from the nearby camp, anxiety had changed to appetite. He mentioned this to Gaetano, who said that nothing was easier than to make supper when they had bread, wine, and 6 partridge in the boat, and a fire to prepare them. "Moreover," he added, "if your excellency is so tempted by the smell of that kid, I can go and offer our neighbours 2 of our birds for a slice of their beast." "Do it, Gaetano, do it," said Franz. "You are a born negotiator." Meanwhile, the sailors had pulled up handfuls of heather and made firewood from myrtle and green oak branches, then set fire to it, so that they had quite a fine blaze going. Franz was waiting impatiently, sniffing the smell of roasting kid, when the master came back with an anxious look about him. "What now?" asked Franz. "Have they refused our offer?" "On the contrary," Gaetano replied. "Their chief, on learning that you were a young Frenchman, has invited you to dine with him." "Well, well," said Franz, "this chief is a most civil man, and I see no reason to refuse. All the more so as I'm bringing my own contribution to the meal." "It's not that there's more than enough to eat, but he is imposing an unusual condition on your visiting his home." "His home? Does he have a house here, then?" "No, but I am assured that he has a very comfortable home, nonetheless." Do you know this chief? I have heard speak of him. Good things or bad? Both. Well, damn it, what is this condition? That you should let your eyes be bandaged and not remove the blindfold until you are told you can do so. Franz read what he could into Gaetano's face to discover what was behind this suggestion. Gaetano read his thoughts. "The devil!" he said. I know, it needs thinking about." "What would you do in my place?" the young man asked. "I've got nothing to lose. I'd go." "You would agree?" "Yes, if only out of curiosity." "So this chief can show us something unusual?" "Listen," Gaetano said, lowering his voice. "I don't know if what they say is true." He paused and looked around to make sure that they were not overheard. "What do they say?" "They say that the chief lives in a subterranean abode beside which the Pitti Palace is a mere trifle." "What a dream!" Franz said, sitting down again. "Oh, it's not a dream, it's a reality. Kama, pilot of the Saint Ferdinand, went in there one day and came out completely dazzled, saying that such treasures only exist in fairy stories." "You know," said Franz, "what you are telling me sounds as if you were trying to lure me into the caves of Ali Baba." "I am only saying what I was told, Excellency." "So you advise me to accept?" "That I'm not saying. Your Excellency will do as he pleases. I should not like to advise him in such circumstances." Franz thought for a few moments, realised that such a rich man could not feel any envy for him, as he had only a few thousand francs with him, and, since he could see nothing coming of this but an excellent dinner, accepted. Gaetano went back with his answer. However, as we mentioned, Franz was prudent, so he wanted to know as much as he could about his strange and mysterious host. Consequently, he went back to the sailor who, while the above conversation was going on, had been plucking the partridges with the great grave air of a man proud of his job, and asked him what kind of vessel the other men had landed in, since he could not see any speronara, tartan, or other boat. "I'm not concerned about that," the sailor said. "I know their vessel." "Is it a fine one?" "I wish your Excellency such a one, should he sail round the world." "What is its displacement?" 100 tons or thereabouts. In any event, it's a pleasure boat, a yacht as the English call it, but built, you understand, in such a way that it can go to sea in any weather." Where was it built?" "That I don't know, but I believe in Genoa." "And how does the head of a gang of smugglers," Franz asked, "dare to have a yacht built for his trade in the port of Genoa?" "I didn't say that the owner of the yacht was a smuggler," the sailor replied. "No, but I believe Gaetano said so." Gaetano had seen the crew from a distance, but he had not yet spoken to anyone. "And if the man is not a smuggler, then what is he?" "A rich aristocrat who travels for his own pleasure." "Come now," Franz thought to himself, "this man is becoming more and more mysterious, since the stories differ." Then he said aloud, "What is his name?" When asked, he replies that he is called Sinbad the Sailor, but I suspect this may not be his true name. "Sinbad the Sailor?" "Yes." "Where does this gentleman live?" "At sea." "What country does he come from?" "I don't know." "Have you seen him?" "A few times." "What's he like?" "Your Excellency can judge for himself." "And where will he entertain me?" "Doubtless in the underground palace that Gaetano mentioned." "But have you ever been curious when you landed on this island and found it deserted to try and enter this enchanted palace?" "Oh, yes, indeed, Excellency," the sailor replied. "More than once, in fact, but all our efforts have been fruitless. We have looked all round the grotto and not found the smallest passageway. In any case, it is said that the door does not open with a key, but with a magic word." "I have definitely stepped off into a tale from the 1001 Nights," Franz muttered. "His Excellency awaits you," said a voice behind him which he recognized as that of the sentry. He had with him 2 men from the crew of the yacht. In reply, Franz simply took out his handkerchief and offered it to the man who had spoken. Without a word, they blindfolded him, taking enough care to show that they were afraid he might commit some indiscretion, then made him swear that he would not try to remove the blindfold. He swore. At that, the 2 men each took one of his arms, and they led him forward, preceded by the sentry. After some 30 paces, he guessed, from the increasingly appetizing smell of kid, that they were walking past the encampment. They carried on for about 50 paces more, clearly proceeding in the direction that had been forbidden to Gaetano, which explained why they had not wanted him to go there. Soon, from the change in the air, he realized that he was going underground, and, after they had walked for a few more seconds, he heard a creaking sound, and felt that the air had again changed, to become warm and scented. Finally, he felt his feet walking on a thick, soft carpet, and his guides let go of his arms. There was a moment's silence, and a voice said, in good French, though with a foreign accent, "Welcome to my home, monsieur. You may take off your handkerchief." As one may imagine, Franz did not wait to be asked again. He took off his handkerchief, and found himself standing in front of a man between 38 and 40, wearing Tunisian dress, that is to say a red skullcap with a long blue silk tassel, a jacket in black woolen cloth embroidered all over with gold thread, wide, loose dark red trousers with gaiters in the same colour, embroidered in gold like the jacket, and yellow Turkish slippers. Around his waist was a splendid cashmere belt, with a sharp little curved dagger hanging from it. Although his colouring was an almost livid white, the man had a remarkably handsome face. The eyes were bright and penetrating, the nose straight and almost on a level with the forehead, suggesting the purest Greek type, and the teeth, white as pearls, shone splendidly under a dark moustache. It was only the pallor that was strange. The man looked as if he had been shut up for a long time in a tomb, and afterwards had been unable to recover the natural rosy complexion of the living. Though not very tall, he was well built and had the small hands and feet typical of a Mediterranean man. However, what astonished Franz, who had treated Gaetano's story as a fantasy, was the sumptuousness of the furnishings. The whole room was hung with crimson Turkish hangings, brocaded with gold flowers. In a recess there was a sort of divan, and above it a display of Arab swords with vermeil sheaths and hilts shining with precious stones. From the ceiling dangled a lamp in Venetian glass, delightful in shape and colour, and his feet sank up to the ankles in the Turkish rug underneath them. There were curtains hanging in front of the door by which Franz had entered, and in front of another door which led into a second room which seemed to be splendidly lit. The man allowed his guest a moment to take all this in, while using the opportunity to examine him in turn, and keeping his eyes fixed on him. "Monsieur," he said finally, "I beg you to forgive me 1,000 times for the precautions that we had to take before showing you into my home, but since this island is deserted for most of the time, if the secret of where I live were to get out, I should no doubt return to find my dwelling in a rather poor state. I should be much displeased at this, not because of any loss that it might occasion, but because I should no longer have the assurance that, whenever I wish, I can separate myself from the rest of the world. Now I shall try to make you forget any slight displeasure I may have caused you, by offering you something that you surely did not expect to find here, namely a decent supper and quite a good bed." "My dear host," said Franz, "you must not apologize. I know that people who visit enchanted palaces always do so blindfold. Look at Raoul in the Huguenots. And I really have no cause for complaint. because what you are showing me is equal to the marvels of the Arabian Nights." "Alas, I have to say, like Lucullus, if I had known I was going to have the honour of your visit, I should have made some preparation for it. But in the event, I put my humble retreat at your disposal and invite you to share my supper, such as it is. Ali, are we served?" At almost that very moment, the curtain in front of the door was raised, and a Nubian indicated to his master that they could proceed into the dining room. "Now," the stranger told Franz, "I am not sure whether you agree with me, but I find nothing more irritating than to spend 2 or 3 hours with a person and not know by what name or title one should address him. Observe that I respect the laws of hospitality too much to ask you your name or title. I should just like to ask you to suggest some name or other which I might use when speaking to you. As for myself, to put you similarly at ease, I should tell you that people are accustomed to call me Sinbad the Sailor." "And I," said Franz, "I shall tell you that, as I have everything except the celebrated magic lamp, I see no objection for the moment to your calling me Aladdin. In this way we can stay in the Orient, where I suspect that I must have been transported with the help of some good genie." "Well, Aladdin, sir," said the strange host, "you heard that we are served, I think. So please be good enough to come into the dining room. Your humble servant will go first to show you the way." At these words, raising the curtain, Sinbad stepped through the doorway. Franz went from one wonder to another. The table was splendidly laid. Once he had assured himself of this important detail, he looked around. The dining room was no less magnificent than the boudoir that he had just left. It was entirely in marble, with the most precious antique bas-reliefs. The room was oblong, and at each end there were superb statues carrying baskets on their heads. The baskets contained 2 pyramids of wonderful fruit: Sicilian pineapples, pomegranates from Malaga, oranges from the Balearics, French peaches and Tunisian dates. As for the supper, it consisted of a roast pheasant sitting on a bed of Corsican blackbirds, a wild boar's ham in jelly, a quarter of a kid à la tartare, a magnificent turbot, and a huge lobster. Between the main dishes were smaller plates with the various side dishes. The serving dishes were silver, and the plates of Japanese porcelain. Franz rubbed his eyes to make sure he was not dreaming. Only Ali was allowed to wait on them, acquitting himself very well. The guest complimented his host on the fact. "Yes, he really does do his best. He recalls that I saved his life, and, as he was attached to his head, apparently, he owes me some gratitude for having preserved it for him." "It's very simple. It appears that the fellow had wandered closer to the harem of the Bey of Tunis than is acceptable. In consequence, he was condemned by the Bey to have his tongue, his hand, and his head cut off. The tongue on the first day, the hand on the second, and the head on the third. Just going to skip that bit. For a moment Franz said nothing, considering what he should think of the cruel good humour with which his host had told him this story. "And like the honourable sailor whose name you have taken," he asked, changing the subject, "do you spend all your time travelling?" "Yes, this is the result of a vow that I made at the time when I did not expect I should be able to accomplish it," the stranger said with a smile. "I have made a few vows of that sort, and I hope to be able to accomplish them all in due course." Though Sinbad had spoken these words with the greatest sang-froid, his eyes gave a glance of peculiar ferocity. "Have you suffered a great deal, monsieur?" Franz asked. Sinbad shuddered and stared closely at him. "How can you tell that?" he asked. "Everything speaks of it," said Franz. "Your voice, your look, your pallor, even the sort of life that you lead." "What? I lead the happiest life of any man I know. the life of a pasha. I am the lord of creation. If I am enjoying myself in a place, I stay there. If I am bored, I leave. I am as free as a bird, and like a bird I have wings. I have only to make a sign for the people around me to obey me. From time to time I amuse myself in teasing justice by snatching a wanted bandit away from it, or a criminal with the police on his trail. Then I have my own justice, high and low, which suspends no sentences and hears no appeals, which merely condemns or pardons and concerns nobody. Oh, if you could have tasted my life, you would want no other. You would never return to the world unless you had some great project to carry out. Some act of revenge, for example? Said Franz. The stranger held the young man in one of those looks that penetrate to the depths of the soul and the mind. Why revenge? He asked. Because, said Franz, you look to me like a man who has been persecuted by society and has a terrible account to settle with it. Well, well, Sinbad said, laughing his strange laugh and showing his sharp white teeth. You're quite wrong. You might not think it, but I am a kind of philanthropist, and perhaps one day I shall go to Paris to rival Monsieur Appert and the man in the little blue cloak. Would that be your first visit? Certainly, it would. I don't appear very curious, do I? I assure you, however, that it is not my fault if I have not been before, and it will happen one day or another. Do you expect to go soon? I don't know yet. It depends on circumstances that are still uncertain. I should like to be there when you come, so that I could return, as far as I am able, the hospitality that you have been so generous as to offer me on Monte Cristo. I would be most happy to accept your offer, the host replied, but if I do go, unfortunately, it might well be incognito. Meanwhile the dinner continued, and appeared to have been served purely for Franz, for the stranger had barely nibbled at one or two of the dishes in the splendid feast that he had offered him, and on which his unexpected guest had dined handsomely. Finally Ali brought the dessert, or rather he took the baskets from the hands of the statues and placed them on the table. Between the two baskets he set down a little bowl in vermeil, with a lid of the same metal. Franz's curiosity was awakened by the respect with which the servant had brought this bowl. He lifted the lid and saw a sort of greenish paste that he did not recognize, though it resembled a sort of sweet made from angelica. He replaced the lid, as ignorant of the contents of the bowl after lifting the lid as he had been before, and, turning back to his host, saw him smile at his disappointment. "You cannot guess," he said, "what kind of foodstuff is in that little container, and it intrigues you, I imagine." "I admit it does." "I'll tell you. That sort of green sweetmeat is nothing more nor less than the ambrosia that Hebe served at the table of Jupiter." "Which ambrosia," said Franz, "no doubt, on coming into the hand of man, lost its celestial name to take a human one. What is the name of this substance, to which, I must admit, I feel no great attraction, in ordinary speech?" "Ah!" cried Sinbad, "it is precisely in this that we reveal our base material origins. Often we pass beside happiness without seeing it, without looking at it, or even if we have seen and looked at it, without recognizing it. If you are a practical man and gold is your god, then taste this, and the mines of Peru, Gurajat, and Golconda will be open to you. If you are a man of imagination, a poet, then taste this too, and the boundaries of the possible will vanish, the fields of infinity will be open, and you will walk through them, free in heart, free in mind, in the limitless pasture of reverie. If you are ambitious and seek earthly glory, then you too can taste this, and in an hour you will be a king, not the king of some little kingdom buried away in a corner of Europe like France, Spain, or England, but king of the world, king of the universe, king of creation. Your throne will be raised up on the mountain where Satan took Jesus, and without having to pay him homage, without having to kiss his claw, you will be the sovereign master of all the kingdoms on earth." Aren't you tempted by my offer? Tell me, is it not an easy thing to do, since there is nothing to do but that? Look." With this, he lifted the lid off the little vermeil bowl which contained the substance of which he had spoken so highly, took a coffee-spoonful of the magic sweetmeat, raised it to his lips, and slowly savoured it, his eyes half closed and his head leaning back. Franz gave him as long as he needed to enjoy his favourite food, then, seeing that he had somewhat recovered his attention, said, "But tell me, what is this precious sweetmeat?" "Have you heard speak of the old man of the mountain?" his host asked, "the one who tried to kill Philip Augustus?" "Of course." "Well, you know that he ruled over a rich valley overlooked by the mountain from which he had taken his picturesque name. In that valley were splendid gardens planted by Hassan ben Sabah, and in those gardens were isolated pavilions. According to Marco Polo, he would bring his chosen friends into these pavilions, and there make them eat a certain grass which would take them into paradise, in the midst of plants that were always in flower, fruits that were always ripe, and women who were always virgins. What these fortunate young men imagined, it was reality, was a dream, but a dream so sweet, so intoxicating, so voluptuous that they would sell themselves, body and soul, to the person who had procured it for them, obey his orders like those of God, and strike whatever victim he directed at the furthest end of the earth, dying under torture without a murmur, simply because they believed that the death they would suffer was merely a transition to that life of delights of which the holy grass, which you see before you, had given them a foretaste." "In that case," Franz exclaimed, "it's hashish. Yes, I do know it, at least by name." "Precisely. You have said the word, my lord Aladdin. It's hashish, the best and finest hashish of Alexandria. Hashish from Abu, the great maker, the only man, the man for whom they should build a palace with the following inscription: 'To the merchant of happiness from a grateful world.'" "Do you know," Franz said, "I'm quite eager to judge for myself as to the truth of otherwise of your commendation." "Do so, my dear guest, do so. But do not be content with just one experiment. As with everything, the senses must become accustomed to a new impression, whether it is pleasant or not, happy or sad. Nature wrestles with this divine substance, because our nature is not made for joy, but clings to pain. Nature must be defeated in this struggle, reality must follow dreams, and then the dream will rule, will become the master, the dream will become life, and life become a dream. What a difference is made by this transfiguration! When you compare the sorrows of real life to the pleasures of the imaginary one, you will never want to live again, only to dream forever. When you leave your world for that of others, you will feel as if you have travelled from spring in Naples to winter in Lapland, from paradise to earth, from heaven to hell. Try some hashish, my friend, try it." Instead of replying, Franz took a spoonful of the wonderful paste, about as much as his host had taken, and brought it to his mouth. "Damn it!" he exclaimed, swallowing this divine substance. "I am not yet sure if the outcome will be as pleasant as you say, but the thing itself doesn't seem to me as delicious as you claim." "This is because the nodes of your palate are not yet accustomed to the sublimity of the thing that they are tasting. Tell me, the first time, did you like oysters, tea, porter, truffles, all these things that you were later to adore? Can you understand the Romans who seasoned pheasants with asphodetia, or the Chinese who eat birds' nests? Of course you can't. Well, it's the same with hashish. Just try taking it for a whole week, and no food in the world will seem to you comparable in fineness to this taste which today you find musty and repellent. Now, let us go into the next room, which is your bedroom, and Ali will serve us coffee and give us some pipes." They both got up, and while the man who called himself Sinbad, the name which we too have used from time to time, so that we may be able to designate him in some way, was giving orders to his servant, Franz went through into the other room. The furnishings were simpler, though no less rich. The room was round, and a large divan extended along the walls. But the divan, the walls, the ceiling and the floor were hung with splendid animal skins, as sweet and soft as the deepest piled carpet. There were lions' skins from the Atlas Mountains, with great manes. There were tigers' skins from Bengal, warmly striped. There were the skins of the panthers from the Cape, as merrily spotted as the one that appeared to Dante. Finally, there were bears' skins from Siberia and Norwegian foxes. All these were heaped one upon the other in such profusion that one would have imagined oneself to be walking on the thickest lawn and resting on the most silken couch. Both men lay down upon the divan. Chibouks with jasmine stems and amber mouthpieces were within easy reach, all prepared so that they never needed to smoke the same one twice. They each took one. Ali lit them and went out to fetch coffee. There was a moment's silence in which Sinbad was immersed in the thoughts that seemed continually to occupy him, even in the midst of conversation, and Franz abandoned himself to the silent reverie into which one almost invariably falls when smoking fine tobacco, which seems to carry away all the sufferings of the mind on its smoke and give the smoker in exchange all the dreams of the soul. Ali brought them coffee. "How would you like it?" the stranger said. "À la Française or à la Turque? Strong or weak, with sugar or without, filtered or boiled? You choose, we have it prepared in every manner." "I should like Turkish," Franz replied. "How right you are!" cried his host. "This proves that you have a natural disposition for Oriental life. The Orientals, you understand, are the only people who know how to live. As for me," he added, with one of those odd smiles that did not escape the young man's observant eye, "when I have finished my business in Paris, I shall go and die in the East. And then, if you want to find me, you will have to look in Cairo, Baghdad, or Isfahan." "I do believe," said Franz, "that it will be the easiest thing, because I think I am growing eagle's wings, and with them I shall fly round the world in a day." "That's the hashish working. Well then, open your wings and fly into regions beyond the reach of men. Fear nothing. You are being watched over, and if, like those of Icarus, your wings should melt in the sun, we are there to catch you." He said a few words in Arabic to Ali, who retired without going too far away. As for Franz, a strange transformation was taking place in him. All the physical tiredness of the day, all the concerns awakened in the mind by the events of the evening, were disappearing as in the first moment of rest, when one is still conscious enough to feel the arrival of sleep. His body seemed to acquire the lightness of some immaterial being, his mind became unimaginably clear, and his senses seemed to double their faculties. The horizon was constantly receding. It was no longer that dark horizon which he had seen before falling asleep, and over which a vague terror loomed, but a blue, transparent, and vast horizon, containing all the blueness of the sea, all the sparkle of the sun, and all the perfumes of the breezes. Then, in the midst of the songs of his sailors, songs that were so pure and so clear that they would have made the most divine harmonies if one could have noted them down, he saw the island of Monte Cristo appear, no longer like a threatening reef rising out of the waves, but like an oasis lost in the desert. And as the boat approached, the songs swelled in volume, because an enchanting and mysterious harmony rose towards heaven out of the island, as if some fairy like Lorelei or some enchanter like Amphion wanted to lure a soul towards it or to build a city there. Finally, the boat reached the shore, effortlessly, with no shock, but as lips touched lips, and he came into the cave, without a pause in the charming music. He went down a few steps, or seemed to do so, breathing a fresh and scented air such as must surround Circe's grotto, composed of perfumes that inspire the soul to dream, and warmth such that the senses are inflamed by it, and he saw everything that he had seen before falling asleep, from Sinbad, his fantastic host, to Ali, the servant. Then everything seemed to fade and become confused before his eyes, like the last rays of a magic lantern going out, and he found himself in the room with the statues, lit only by one of those dim antique lights that are kept burning at night to watch over sleep or voluptuous pleasures. The statues were indeed the same, rich in shape, in sensuality and in poetry, with their magnetic eyes, lustful smiles, and opulently flowing hair. Here were those three great courtesans, Phryne, Cleopatra, and Messalina, then like a pure ray in the midst of these immodest shades, like a Christian angel among the gods of Olympus, came one of those chaste countenances, one of those calm shadows, one of those sweet visions that appeared to veil its virginal brow beside all these marble impurities. At this, it seemed to him that the three statues had combined the love of all three to offer to a single man, and that that man was himself, that they were approaching the bed where he was dreaming a second sleep, their feet covered by their long white tunics, bare-breasted, their hair coursing like water across their shoulders, in those poses which can seduce gods, but not saints, and those burning looks, such as those the serpent turns on a bird, and he was abandoning himself to these painful expressions, as if to an embrace as voluptuous as a kiss. Franz felt that he was closing his eyes, and that in the last glance he cast around him, he noticed the modest statue cover itself entirely with its veil. Then his eyes closed on reality, and his senses opened to inconceivable feelings. After that, he felt unremitting sensuality and continual love-making, such as the prophet promised to the elect. Now all those stone mouths became living ones, and those breasts became warm, to such an extent that for Franz, falling for the first time under the domain of hashish, this lust was almost pain, and this voluptuousness almost torture, as he felt the lips of these statues, supple and cold as the coils of a viper, touching his parched mouth. But the more his arms tried to ward off this unknown embrace, the more his senses fell beneath the spell of this mysterious dream, so that, after a struggle in which he would have given his soul, he abandoned himself unreservedly and eventually fell back, panting, seared with exhaustion, worn out with lust, beneath the kisses of these marble mistresses and the enchantment of this unimaginable dream. I guess we'll leave it there. It's a pretty interesting place to leave it on. Don't take drugs, kids. General rule of thumb. So, oh, voice is going a bit. So what do we think about Dantes? I'm starting not to like him. The bit I skipped over was basically just like Dante's saying how much he basically waited till this poor guy who he then took as his servant. He was like, oh, he was going to get his tongue cut out, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll wait until he gets his tongue cut out, but not until he gets his hand cut out, because I'd like a dumb servant, but I don't want a servant without hands. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I know he's meant to be. We're not meant to necessarily like him at this point, but also. Yeah, I thought that might have been a little bit too much. Also a little bit of casual racism in there. So yeah, just skipped over that little section there. But I also do kind of maybe I should have read it. I don't know. I do quite like the fact that Franz seems to be like, dude, can you not? So yeah, it strikes me as the kind of thing that it's obviously not Dumas' kind of viewpoint. It's more of a, this character has sort of started going a bit bad, but also I don't really like talking about or reading passages that have got like slavery and stuff involved in them, especially cutting out tongues. It's not very nice. But yes, I hope we're all doing well. I hope we all enjoyed. I swear the chapters are getting longer. Although I did just look at the next one and it's about 3 pages long, so maybe I should have read that first. But also, I don't know if you can hear, my voice is a little bit croaky. But yeah, taking it out of context like this is a good way to acknowledge it, but not... Yeah, exactly. Obviously, like in the book, it's not necessarily accepting or condoning it, but also, I don't know, it just doesn't feel particularly great to, because he's talking in first person, it doesn't feel particularly great to be saying those kinds of things from a first person perspective. So, but yeah, that was just that little bit. It was basically him saying that he wanted a servant who couldn't speak. Because that's cool and fine. So